One fraction of a second. That is all a photograph is. 1/400th of a second of light hitting a lens. And yet, some of those fractions have never left us. Some images were suppressed, banned, buried by editors who decided the world was not ready to see them. They were wrong, because the photographs that disturb us the most are the ones that are telling us something we desperately do not want to hear. Today, we look at 5 of them. The first of these photographs is known as the falling man. On the morning of September 11, 2001, a photographer named Richard Drew was on his way to a maternity shoot in Manhattan. He never made it. Instead, he ended up on the streets below the World Trade Center with his camera, and over the next hour, he took over 200 photographs. One of them would become one of the most controversial images in the history of American photojournalism. The photo shows a man falling, perfectly vertical, one leg bent slightly at the knee, almost composed, almost peaceful. The North Tower is a clean gray line behind him, bisecting the frame. The sky is an impossible, cloudless blue. It ran on the front pages of newspapers across the country the morning after the attacks, and then it vanished. Papers that had printed it received hundreds of furious letters. Readers called it exploitative, disrespectful, obscene. One editor described the backlash as the most intense his paper had ever received over a single photograph. The image was quietly retired. For years, it was treated as if it did not exist. But here is what the backlash was really about. It was not about the photograph being offensive. It was about what the photograph demanded of you. Because unlike the images of smoke and falling towers, images of events, of forces, this was an image of a choice. Somewhere between 50 and 200 people jumped from the Twin Towers that morning. The official death toll does not record them separately. For years, the city of New York would not formally acknowledge that anyone had jumped at all. The falling man forced a question that America was not ready to answer. What do you do when the only choice left is the manner in which you die? For decades, the identity of the man in the photograph was unknown. Journalists tried and failed. Families were approached, some horrified at the suggestion that the figure could be their relative, others quietly hoping it was. Because at least then there would be a picture. The most credible identification points to a man named Jonathan Briley, a 43-year-old audio technician who worked in the restaurant at the top of the North Tower. His sister, when shown the photograph, recognized his clothes immediately, but it has never been officially confirmed. Richard Drew has never apologized for taking the picture. People jumped, he said. I have to show that. That is my job. The photograph still exists. It has never been destroyed. Another photograph that deeply disturbed the world was taken in Colombia in 1985. It shows a young girl named Omayra Sánchez. On the 13th of November, 1985, the Nevado del Ruiz volcano in Colombia erupted. The eruption itself was not the catastrophe. The catastrophe was what the heat did to the snowcap above. It melted it. In hours, 4 massive mudflows called lahars came roaring down the mountainside at over 50 kilometers an hour, swallowing entire villages whole. The town of Omayra, a town of nearly 30,000 people, was buried under several meters of ash and mud in under 15 minutes. A 13-year-old girl named Omayra Sánchez survived the initial wave. She was found alive, her head and arms above the surface of the mud, but her legs were pinned beneath the debris of her collapsed home. Trapped underwater, her feet caught under the weight of a concrete wall, she could not be freed. Rescue workers tried for 3 days. Photographer Frank Fournier arrived on the 2nd day. What he found was a child who had been standing in cold water for over 60 hours. She was exhausted. She was beginning to show signs of gangrene. Her eyes had started to turn red from the pressure building inside her body, and she was still talking, still singing, sometimes, still smiling at the rescuers around her. Fournier took her photograph. He agonized over it. He sat with the image for weeks before releasing it. When he finally did, it spread across the world. Paris Match ran it on their cover. It became the defining image of the disaster, and it triggered a furious debate that has never fully been resolved. Was it right to photograph her? Some said no, that Fournier should have put down the camera and helped, that the world did not need to see her face to understand the scale of the tragedy. Fournier's response was measured and devastating. He said, there was nothing he could have done to free her. The rescue workers, professionals with equipment, could not free her. He was a photographer. The one thing he could do was make sure the world could not look away. The Colombian government had known the volcano was at risk of erupting for months. Scientists had issued warnings. A hazard map had been drawn up showing exactly which towns were in the path of a lahar. It had been largely ignored. After Fournier's photograph ran around the world, that became impossible to deny. Omayra Sánchez died on the morning of November 16, 1985, roughly 60 hours after the mudflow reached Armero. In the final hours, the rescue workers sat with her, held her hands, and tried to keep her warm. She asked them at one point whether she would be late for school. Frank Fournier's photograph won the World Press Photo of the Year in 1986. He has said he is proud of it, and that it still haunts him.
She was a beautiful kid. She was an amazing person. When I saw Omayra, I knew she would die.
Not every disturbing photograph is dark. Some of the most unsettling images in history are the ones that look, at first glance, like pure joy. Because when you learn what is underneath them, the joy becomes something far more complicated. One of the most powerful examples of this is a photograph called Burst of Joy. On March 17, 1973, a United States Air Force plane landed at Travis Air Force Base in California. On board were American prisoners of war, finally returning home after years of captivity in North Vietnam. One of them was Lieutenant Colonel Robert Sturm, a fighter pilot who had been shot down over Hanoi in 1967 and held as a prisoner for 5.5 years. As he stepped onto the tarmac, his family ran toward him. Associated Press photographer Slava Vider was there to capture the moment. What his lens caught was this. Sturm's 15-year-old daughter Lori, arms flung wide, feet barely touching the ground, sprinting toward her father with an expression of such complete, total, unguarded joy that it looks almost unreal. Behind her, his other children and his wife Loretta rushing in the same direction, a perfect wave of reunion, frozen in a single frame. The photograph was called Burst of Joy. It won the Pulitzer Prize in 1974. It was reproduced on posters. It became a symbol of the end of the Vietnam War. It was held up as proof that after all of it, after all the years and the loss and the protests, some things could still be mended. 3 days before that plane landed, Robert Sturm had received a letter. It was from his wife, Loretta. She was ending the marriage. She had fallen in love with someone else during the years he was a prisoner. She wanted a divorce. He received the letter while on his way home from captivity. Sturm never told anyone at the time. He walked off that plane. He opened his arms. He let his daughter run into them, and he said nothing. The joy in the photograph was real. Everything around it was not. That is all a camera can ever do. Capture the surface of a moment. What is underneath it is another story entirely. One of the most iconic and consequential photographs of the Vietnam War is known as Napalm Girl. On June 8, 1972, Associated Press photographer Nick Ut was covering the Vietnam War near the village of Trang Bang when South Vietnamese aircraft dropped napalm bombs on the road ahead. Among the people running from the smoke, screaming, was a 9-year-old girl. She was not clothed. Her clothes had burned off. Her arms were held slightly away from her body, the instinctive posture of someone whose skin is on fire. Her name was Phan Thi Kim Phuc, and she was screaming, "Nang Qua, Nang Quat." Too hot. Nick Ut took the photograph. Then he put down his camera and drove her to hospital. Doctors initially refused to treat her. They believed she would not survive, and they did not want to waste their resources. Ut threatened them. He told them he would make sure the world knew they had turned away a dying child. They treated her. Kim Phuc survived, but she spent 14 months in hospital. She underwent 17 surgeries. The napalm had burned through to the bone across a third of her body. When Ut's photograph was sent back to the AP bureau in Saigon, editors nearly did not transmit it. One editor, Horst Faas, a legendary war photographer himself, made the call to override the policy. "If this photo is not transmitted," he reportedly said, "I will resign." The photograph landed on the front pages of newspapers across the world the next morning. It became one of the defining images of public opposition to the Vietnam War. President Nixon, upon seeing it, reportedly questioned whether it was faked. It is widely credited as one of the photographs that accelerated the end of American involvement in the war. For Kim Phuc, the photograph was both a gift and a burden she carried for decades. The South Vietnamese government used her as a propaganda tool throughout her childhood. She was made to meet foreign journalists, to smile, to represent survival. When she tried to pursue her own studies, she wanted to be a doctor. The government pulled her out of university and sent her back to her village to be photographed. She defected to Canada in 1992 during a layover in Gander, Newfoundland.
And she called, nóng quá, Vietnam too hot. I think I'm die. And then I pick her up to my car with all children. Inside the car, she sit like this. She said, I'm die, because skin to come off.
Our final photograph on this list was taken in Beijing in 1989. It shows a man who became known simply as Tank Man. On the morning of June 5, 1989, the day after the Chinese government sent tanks into Tiananmen Square to crush the pro-democracy protests that had occupied it for weeks, a man walked out into Chang'an Avenue. He was carrying shopping bags. He stood in front of a column of Type 59 battle tanks, and he did not move. 4 photographers captured him from 4 different hotel windows overlooking the square. They were all staying at the Beijing hotel, all hiding their cameras from Chinese security forces who were actively confiscating film. Stuart Franklin hid his roll of film inside a box of tea and smuggled it out of China with a French student he had just met. Jeff Widener hid his canister inside his underwear. The tank stopped. The man stepped in front of it again. The tank tried to go around. The man stepped in front of it again. This happened several times. For roughly 90 seconds, one man with shopping bags halted a column of tanks in one of the most surveilled public spaces in the world, the morning after a massacre. Then, witnesses say, several people ran out and pulled him away into the crowd. He disappeared. In the 35 years since, the Chinese government has conducted one of the most sustained and thorough efforts to erase a photograph from history ever attempted. The image is blocked on every Chinese internet platform. It does not appear in Chinese textbooks. Young people in China, when shown the photograph in studies, frequently do not recognize it. In 1990, the Chinese government claimed he was a student who had never been arrested. They have never provided his name. Investigators, journalists, and human rights organizations have spent decades trying to identify him. The most credible leads suggested his name was Wang Weilin, a 19-year-old student. That has never been confirmed. It may never be. He may still be alive. He may have been executed in the weeks after the photograph was taken. No one outside of the Chinese government knows. What we do know is this. In every photograph taken that morning, the man is alone. The square behind him has been cleared. He came back, after everything, after the tanks had already won. And he stood there by himself with his shopping bags, and he said no further. Not with a weapon, not with an army, not even with a sign, just with his body, and the decision not to move it. The photographs taken that morning have been named among the most influential images of the 20th century. The man in them has no confirmed name, no verified fate, no government willing to acknowledge he existed, and yet here we are, 35 years later, still talking about him. We like to think of history as something that happens in grand gestures, in speeches and treaties and battles. But sometimes it happens in a single click, in one person standing in front of a tank, in a child running down a road, in a daughter sprinting across a tarmac toward a father she doesn't yet know she is about to lose, in a man falling against a blue September sky. The camera does not lie, but it does not tell the whole truth either. What the best photographs have always done is hand you a fragment of a moment and ask you to sit with it, to feel the weight of it, to not look away.